thanks for tuning in. I'm Jennifer Taff. I'm the Executive Director of DuPage and Chicago South Suburbs Habitat for Humanity. And today we're going to take a deep dive into Habitat. We're going to talk about our landscape, our geographical area, the families that we serve, and everything in between. And with me today I have...
Thanks, Jen. My name is Andrew Sparks. I'm the Associate Director of DuPage and Chicago South Suburbs Habitat for Humanity.
And I'm Amanda. I'm the Senior Communications and Advocacy Manager at DuPage and Chicago South Suburbs Habitat for Humanity. So Jen, do you want to tell us a little bit about who we serve and what landscapes we're in?
Sure. So currently DuPage and Chicago South Suburbs speaks for itself, but I'll go a little bit about beyond that. So DuPage County specifically, and then Chicago South Suburbs is anywhere from 294 to the Indiana border and back to, is it 88? 88. With that, we serve families that fit into our family program criteria based on family size and income. You want to go into like the programs that we serve, or is that later on?
We'll talk about that a little later.
Okay.
So setting that up, that's where we are right now. Andrew, do you want to tell us a little bit about what Habitat is, Habitat for Humanity International, and our origin story?
Definitely. We think back to our story and how Habitat was started, because I mean the way that Habitat was founded and the story that we share really can help give us direction for where we're going today. The predecessor to Habitat started in 1942, and this was in Americus, Georgia. There was a farm. Clarence Jordan was the name of the founder of the farm, and the farm was called Koinonia Farms. And Clarence, he was a Christian, and he really believed in creating a community at his farm where he was bringing people together across racial divides. And this is 42, so this is a time when segregation is still very much in play. But he had this vision of creating a communal living and communal farming community where black farmers, white farmers would come together, they would work together, they would live side by side, share meals together. And so this is the community he created in Georgia. In the 60s, a couple from further north came down, the Fuller family, and they came and spent some time at Koinonia Farm. And the Fullers would eventually be the founders of Habitat for Humanity. And they really caught this vision of being in this residential farming community, seeing the integrated living, and had this vision for building partnership housing programs. And so that's how Habitat started. In 1976, Habitat for Humanity International was born. So it was an organization really built around the global vision for building housing opportunities, and this model of partnership housing where those who needed shelter and needed safe, decent, affordable housing would build their homes alongside volunteers with investment from sponsorships in order to receive financing for their homes, either no interest or low interest loans to purchase their homes. And since then, since 1976, Habitat has grown. It's in all 50 states and 70 countries. And of course, it's a global organization, but really with local impact. So what we do in DuPage County, in South Suburban Cook County, is connected to this global movement of affordable homeownership, but the solutions are very much tailored to our local area. So I'll just share a couple things so we're thinking about this story and how it informs what we're doing today. I'm just thinking about the housing need in a state like Illinois. 1 in 7 families are what we would call housing cost burdened. Housing is considered affordable when you're spending no more than 30% of your gross income on your housing costs. So 1 in 7 families are spending more than that 30%, which means their housing cost burden makes it a lot harder to access food, makes it a lot harder to access healthcare, all these other things that you would think about when you're thinking about quality of life. And if we're thinking more specifically about DuPage County and South Suburban Cook County, we even see a larger need than that 1 in 7. So we find 43% of rental households in DuPage County are housing cost burdened. And then 36% of South Suburban Cook County households are also housing cost burden. And so these are some of the things and the challenges that organizations like Habitat are facing. But it's really inspiring to think back of how we began as an organization with that vision of building community, of reaching across barriers, racial barriers, to bring people together and to provide solutions that make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And a little bit about what we see. So, you know, in 1942, we saw a lot of racial divide, and that has improved since, but we're still dealing with a lot of that. So, a lot of discrimination has been perpetuated in the housing landscape, which has been, you know, a difficult hurdle to overcome, especially, you know, in some areas more than others. We have things like redlining that we still see today has effects. And so a little bit about that, transporting us back to 1942, a lot of where this started was the GI Bill. So when veterans would come home from World War II, you know, there was part of the deal was supposed to be that they got down payment assistance. There was housing being built for them, and it just so happened that that was true for some veterans, but not true for some other veterans. And so when when you go to put a down payment on a house and they say you don't get that equal access to that money, that's where the conversation about generational wealth really begins. And that's part of our mission now, is trying to understand what happens when a family doesn't have that generational wealth, and how can Habitat help them get there. So that is just, again, bring us back to the 40s. That's how everything began in modern history, about where that divide and the conversation about equity and equal being two very different things, and why we have a special concentration on that part of our mission still today. So when we continue the conversation around equity, and we again jump back in time to like the 1940s and post World War II, what happened was that the government and municipalities, developers, they were building these single family homes for veterans to come home and really grab onto that American dream. But for those that weren't included in those bunch, typically, you know, people, black and brown people, they got put into public housing, which were the Cabrini Greens of the world. And so the access to the American dream really dwindled. And whenever, a family of color was able to establish some kind of funds that got them to that wealth level where they could go into a community, they were met with a lot of upheaval from that community. And so that kind of feeds into what we do in building back that American dream for all people. And that's part of what we do at DuPage and Chicago South Suburbs. We look at a lot of different buckets when we talk about equity. So we look at increasing homeownership and neighborhood opportunities for the black and brown community, but we also look at aging in place. We look at veterans, we look at limited and low income, single mothers, the IDD community. So we're really covering equity. We're trying our best to, on a broad level, to bring that American dream kind of back home for everyone. So with that being said, a lot of these things exist in intersections. So you're not just falling into one bucket, but you might be falling into multiple buckets. And that can, affordability and accessibility is on a spectrum. And so because of that, at that intersection, you might fall further on that spectrum in one direction or the other direction in terms of accessibility and affordability. So looking at that and how we help out, Jen, do you want to tell us a little bit about our departments and how we impact that?
Sure, and I think just to your comment of the cross sections and how it overlaps, one of the things we look at from Habitat standpoint is a holistic approach to how we're serving our clients. So when a client comes to us with a need, let's say they have the need for housing, but we're not able to serve them, we build up, and it's something that we look at holistically. I can't say that word apparently today. We look holistically at the client to say, well, if we don't have the right program or services for them, then we refer them to one of our partners in the community. But back to your original question was, what are our departments? So I would say we have a lot of departments within our affiliate, DuPage and Chicago South Suburbs, but three that really drive our programs is the home ownership, our home repair, and our neighborhood revitalization. So our home ownership, as you know, and Andrew can speak to this as well, but is looking at the families that we're serving each fiscal year and how they fit into our need matrix based on family size and income. From there, they go through a rigorous program criteria or schedule of coming into our program and really setting up that family for success. We don't want to provide an opportunity for an affordable mortgage and not set the family up for success from a holistic standpoint. Same thing with our home repair. We serve a lot of aging in place veteran population that fit in either one or both or cross sector. And if you have an aging in place client that can't afford to pay for their medication, how are they going to pay for the deferred maintenance on their home?
Right.
So we really want to set those families up for success, the clients up for success. And once upon a time, many years ago, when we started our home repair program, it's based on where our funding's coming from. It's based on who believes in our mission and who's going to fund our mission, but we also believe in the families that we serve. So the running joke at one point was, well, if they're neighbor builder Christian and they're veteran, then we have funds for them because they fit in each one of those buckets or those cross sectors, and it was affordable not only for Habitat to serve them, but also for the family or the client that's receiving the services.
Can you talk a little bit more about financial literacy and how important that is for our families as they kind of go through the process?
Yeah, absolutely. So for anybody that's looking at taking out a mortgage or understanding what their budget is, for our families, we go above and beyond, I believe, with our financial literacy. So we partner with a HUD counseling agency that provides check-in points. So at least every 3 months, the HUD counseling agency is checking in to make sure, where are you spending your money? Are you saving your money? Do we really need to be spending money on that? So that the family learns and is educated along their journey. From the Habitat side, we have a mentor, a buddy, or a sponsor, whichever coin term you want to use, that follows the family, and the family has access to that mentor 24/7 in a sense. Please don't call our mentors at 3 a.m. in the morning, they don't appreciate that. Dislike, strongly. But all joking aside, the mentors and the families work on that budgeting, that financial literacy, so that when they get to the end of their homeowner journey, they're ready for their next chapter of budgeting in their life. Going from renting an apartment to homeownership it's a different world. It's, the electricity goes up, the gas goes up, the food may even go up because you have access to it on a more regular basis maybe. Andrew could talk about that as a new homeowner.
Yeah, it's a change for sure. Yeah, and another thing I'll mention about both the homeownership and the repair programs is the way that we're thinking about the housing situation in the U.S. And the rising costs of housing, how supply and the limited supply of decent housing is really one of the drivers of that increasing of costs. When there's less supply and there's demand, then prices will go up. And so I think one of the things that Habitat is doing, what we're doing in our localities is, by building new homes, by rehabbing homes, and by doing them in a way where we're making sure that they're affordable for the people moving in, we're impacting the supply. But then even on the home repair side, if you have a lot of people who are getting older on fixed incomes, who may or may not be able to maintain their homes as the home gets older, the repair program is able to then kind of step in and preserve those homes so that there's the supply of homes is able to continue. So I think both from the family side, but then also thinking about housing affordability, housing supply side, both of those programs, the home ownership and home repair programs, are I think really important on both of those levels.
Yeah, it feeds in. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say accessible versus affordable to that conversation is kind of what you were getting at. Accessible doesn't always mean affordable, vice versa.
Right. And another thing that has been mentioned, but just to make sure that it's really highlighted, that the people we work with buy their homes. So and that's where that empowerment comes into play, providing that dignity of let's work on the financial readiness along the way as the home's being built, as the family is, that partnership model that we talked about at the founding of Habitat. Families working alongside volunteers or alongside Habitat staff to build that home and to make it a reality. But then they're purchasing the home with an affordable mortgage. So just to highlight that as well.
So something that stood out to me when we went to Habitat on the Hill was someone said, a lot of times people tell you to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, but what if you don't have any bootstraps to pull yourself up by? And exactly what you're saying is Habitat is not pulling you up, it's giving you bootstraps so you can do it.
Right. Yeah.
A handout, not a handout. And then I think, we have to dissolve or remove that myth that, our families are low income, they don't have inconsistent employment. That's not true. Our families are very stable, have stable housing, but they need stable home ownership or stable housing, home ownership through Habitat, so that they can provide additional resources to not only themselves but their families. So generationally, wealth is being built, and it's a stepping stone to future plans. I mean, I can give you an example of one of our developments. In the last year, we've bought back 4 of those houses because those families have moved on because they had the opportunity of safe, stable, affordable housing.
So can you talk a little bit about shared equity and how that works with Habitat, the shared equity model?
Sure. So shared equity with the family really provides an opportunity not only for the family, but for the organization like DuPage and Chicago South Suburbs to reinvest back into the home. So when a family is looking at that shared equity piece, they buy their home. They want to move, let's say 10 years. So they bought their house today, in 10 years they're going to sell their house back to Habitat. We have what's called the right of first refusal. So we say, yes, we want to buy your house back. The shared equity piece really is the difference between what they originally bought their house for and what the house is going to sell for now. So that shared equity, the family gets a piece of it and Habitat gets a piece of it. So the family gets to use that to go to that next step, that next bigger house, moved out of state for employment, whatever the situation is. And then Habitat uses that extra equity to put back into affordable housing.
Sustainability for everyone. Yeah. So we know with a neighborhood, right? A home is not a home. Sometimes it's just a house if you don't do the right things within it and around it. So within a neighborhood, having what a family might need once they move into their house is really what makes it a home in their surroundings. So can you talk a little bit about neighborhood revitalization and reinvestment?
I could talk all day about neighborhood revitalization.
Tell the people where you started in Habitat and
so I mean, it's no secret that Jen loves neighborhood revitalization, and that's really where my passion lies. From the housing standpoint, it takes a village. It doesn't take one person, it takes a village. So it takes a community to provide somebody their home as opposed to a house in a neighborhood. So neighborhood revitalization started in DuPage affiliate about 2014, 2015. And we're really looking at, instead of just rehabbing one house in a neighborhood, how do we bring the community together, provide additional hope to the families that live there, and build up the resources in the community for those folks. So the quality of life framework is something from International. And back in 2014, 2015, there were sector outcomes. So it was education, transportation, extracurricular activities, access to healthcare, just to name a few. And DuPage was actually one of the pilot affiliates to look at, if we were to do a success measure survey model or a feedback loop model, how would this impact the communities, build up the community, and provide additional sustainability to not only the families that we serve through homeownership, but in the community as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of brings, Andrew, you said something earlier about access to food, healthcare, all of those pieces that happen to be the sector outcomes, and how housing affordability affects all those things. So how would you say, in your head, does all of that equate back to that original 1942 message of equity?
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how that original vision and the seeds that were planted at Koinonia Farm are finding kind of new life in the current habitat programs and models. Because you have on Koinonia Farm, you have people of different backgrounds, different races living together, working together, having that housing piece, shelter piece covered. But then one of the key components of that was also sustainable farming practices and really having a community within that their living space and their working space.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, when we think about neighborhood revitalization, quality of life, I would say, and maybe we would say, that housing really is that foundational component, where you live, and having a level of stability with housing really does lead to, okay, now we know where our kids are going to go to school. Now we know where we're able to access food. Now we're able to get to our doctors if we need to get to our doctors. And if housing is then affordable, then you have that remainder after the first of the month when housing, your housing bill is due, to be able to access those other things.
Right.
So what I really appreciate about the quality of life framework and neighborhood revitalization is that, yes, we are a housing provider, and that's our bread and butter, and that's the foundation. But it's not just a house, it's not just brick and mortar or roof over your head. That's how then are you building connections with your neighbors, and as neighbors, as a neighborhood and a community, are you able to advocate for yourselves and name the things that you would like to see in your community, and from that place of stability in your housing, you're then able to kind of move forward in that way. Habitat facilitating that, I think, is a really good model.
Yeah. I think it brings it back to when we look at kind of all the division there is around all these social issues that are happening right now. A lot of people say to themselves, and a kind of a rhetorical question, what do we do? Like, what's the answer to it all? And obviously there is no direct answer to it all, but I think the silver bullet is really housing, to your point, on how it's not just a social issue. Oh, we need to help certain people or get certain people in homes. It's really that economic issue too. Is the silver bullet is that it is a social solve, but it's also an economic solve, because to your point, once you're rooted in a community, you're paying back into the community via a tax, a property tax. It really is hitting these economic, check marks as well as the social check marks. And so Jen, I just want to kind of throw it back to you. Something Andrew had said was constituents being able to say what they need and vocalize that and know who to go to. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in Hanover Park and how you've seen residents kind of find their voice and use that to tell the local government what they need and what they want to see?
Yeah, so I mean, Habitat was the convener, the facilitator when neighborhood revitalization came to Hanover Park, and really it's working with the residents to teach them and guide them. It's really giving them the bootstraps to lead them to be advocates and be the voice of not only themselves but other residents that don't want to or can't, or for whatever reason can't speak for themselves in a sense.
Right.
So really it's that sense of community that the residents came together. Habitat was just the convener, the facilitator, like Andrew alluded to earlier. But really at the end of the day, it's providing the tools and the resources for long-term sustainability with housing as the core, but the ultimate goal or outcomes is really to bring that sense of community, have that collective action, and be the voice for a larger community impact.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking a lot about various things, about not only the organization, but the housing landscape, housing justice, all of these really big topics. So why, Andrew, I'll toss it to you first. Why do you think it's important that we talk about these things as an organization?
Yeah, I'll just start by saying I think sometimes Habitat is seen as, it's a great way to volunteer, it's a great way to get involved, but let's avoid talking about the history of housing. Let's avoid, maybe thinking a little bit more deeply about kind of what we're involved in and how we're making impact and change. So I think just at a base level, it's important to reflect on our history as a country. It's important to reflect on our history as an organization, to understand the challenges that have been faced in the past, how those have been addressed in the past for better or for worse, and how some of that is carrying over to today. So we can think about the ongoing wealth gap between white Americans and non-white Americans. And how we as a housing provider should be responding to that. So I think at a very base level, understanding our history is important, understanding our own story as an organization is important, and understanding how housing is impacting. You talked a little bit ago about that kind of framework that we have around thinking about how housing is impacting Black and brown individuals, people with disabilities, seniors, veterans. There are these different groups of people that we know by looking at data, by learning and putting education first, that there is a greater impact for some people than others when it comes to housing. So I think it's important for us to not only understand that as people who work for Habitat for Humanity, but to be talking about it and to be engaging with other housing providers, other organizations that are working in those other quality of life areas, to be having conversations with our volunteers, with our constituents, and to really make sure that we have open lines of communication.
Absolutely. Jen, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and I'll just touch on, when you look at the education piece and we're talking to our corporate donors and our families, our volunteers, having that genuine knowledge of what your organization is, whether you work for it, whether you volunteer for it, you have to believe in what you're doing. Because if you don't believe in what you're doing, then you're not going to get a corporate donor to believe in what you're doing.
Right.
And it goes past the, I want to come and volunteer. But if you do want to volunteer, here's how you do it. Thanks for joining us today. We will continue to make impact on the community. We'll continue to talk about Habitat. We'll continue to educate you in the audience, our staff, volunteers, and our constituents. Next time you can join us and we'll be talking about Women's Bill and the wage gap.